I have submitted 14 reports to the Vethara Compliance Authority in the 12 years I have managed this facility. 11 of them concerned routine matters. Processing failures, calibration drift, a supply shortfall in the cold protein stores during the third quarter of Cycle 9. One concerned the death of a subject during a standard Obelus run, which was expected, and which the authority noted without comment. Concerned an attempted breach by a Cathali warrior caste prisoner, which was not expected, which required 40 pages of supplementary documentation. This is the 14th report. I do not know how many pages it will require. I have been sitting at this terminal for a long while, and I have written very little. What I have written, I have deleted. The facts are not complicated. The facts are, if anything, almost insultingly plain. The difficulty is that I cannot present them to the authority without also presenting what they imply, and what they imply is something I am not certain any of us were prepared to understand. I will begin as I always begin with the subject. Her name, as recorded in the intake manifest, was Karis Vaughn, human female, age by her own account 31 years, occupation, cargo routing and load compliance on a mid-tonnage freight hauler operating along the Tessavar corridor. She had no military background, no augmentation on record, no known resistance training, no exposure to sensory hardening protocols, no documented history of neurological abnormality. By every measure in our intake taxonomy, cognitive baseline, stress marker panels, classification index, she placed in the lowest tier we process. Category 4, routine. I want to be precise about that. She was not interesting when she arrived. She was tired. She had spent 11 days in standard holding while we processed the rest of her crew, and by the time she reached the compliance wing she looked like what she was. A working woman who had been kept awake too long and wanted, for more than anything, to sit somewhere quiet. She asked about the food twice. She did not ask about the protocol. Most subjects don't know to ask. I will now describe the Obelus protocol for the record, because I want the authority to understand precisely what it is before I tell them what happened. The protocol was developed by the Vethara Institute 6 decades ago as a non-lethal compliance instrument. The mechanism is neural saturation, a sustained, total bandwidth flood of sensory and cognitive signal delivered directly to the subject's conscious mind through the interface harness. It does not damage tissue. It does not alter chemistry in any permanent way. What it does is fill every available channel of conscious experience, simultaneously and completely, for a sustained period. In every sense you possess firing at maximum capacity at once. Not pain, not pleasure, simply everything, all of it at the same time, without rest or reduction, for as long as the operator chooses to run the sequence. Every sapient mind we have ever tested has a threshold. Below that threshold, the protocol produces compliance. A period of disorientation and cognitive depletion followed by recovery and, typically, cooperation. Above that threshold, the outcome is what the Institute's documentation refers to as cascade dissolution. The conscious architecture of the mind simply fails to reorganize after saturation. The subject does not die. They simply cease, any meaningful sense to be present. 41 species catalogued over 60 years. 41 known threshold curves. Protocol has never failed to find the threshold. Until this. I ran the protocol on Karis Vaughn at 0340 on the 9th day of the current administrative cycle. My team consisted of 3 researchers, Analyst Thevris, who managed the harness calibration, Senior Monitor KL, tracked the biometric feeds, and Oversight Designate Imrath, who was there because the authority requires a second-tier observer on all compliance runs involving non-catalogued species. Human neurological data is sparse in our system. We had 3 prior intake scans from other facilities and a species summary that described the human brain as, quote, remarkably similar in broad architecture to Cathali mid-caste, with noted anomalies in the prefrontal and limbic regions whose functional significance remains unclear. I remember reading that summary and thinking it was the least useful document I had encountered in 12 years of compliance work. I still think that. We seated her in the harness chair at 0337. She asked, with no particular alarm, what the device did. Told her it was a cognitive assessment tool. She nodded and asked if it would take long, because she was, in her words, absolutely exhausted. Thevris completed calibration at 0339. I initiated the run at 0340. For the first 40 seconds, the readings were unremarkable. Elevated cortical activity, elevated cardiovascular response, the standard early phase arousal signature we see in every species at protocol onset. Kale called out the numbers as they climbed, and I watched the harness indicators and thought, as I always do in that first minute, about the threshold curve, where the line would be, how long it would take to find it. At 53 seconds, something changed. Not in the protocol. The protocol was running cleanly at 70% saturation. What changed was in her. Kale said, "Cardiovascular is dropping." I thought there was an equipment fault. I asked him to verify. He verified. The readings were accurate. Her heart rate, which had been elevated at protocol onset, was dropping. Not to a dangerous level, not toward arrest. Dropping to a resting level. The kind of number you see when a subject has been seated quietly for several minutes, with nothing unusual happening to them at all. Thevris said, quietly, cortical delta is spiking. Delta, the slow wave, the wave you see in the deepest stages of natural sleep. I increased saturation to 90%. The cardiovascular readings did not change. The cortical delta deepened. At 94% saturation, which is above the cascade threshold for every species in our taxonomy, without exception. Kale stopped calling out numbers and simply stared at his panel. The biometric trace on Karis Vaughn's readout had settled into a pattern I recognized. I have seen it on recovery scans. I have seen it on long-term holding subjects in their bunks at 0200. She was asleep. Not unresponsive in the clinical sense, not in cascade, asleep, naturally, or as near to naturally as the instruments could determine. Her brain had taken the total bandwidth flood of the obelisk protocol and, apparently, used it as a substrate. The signal we had designed to overwhelm every channel of conscious experience had simply become, for her, the noise she needed in order to rest. We ran the full sequence, 90 minutes, standard compliance duration. At no point did her biometrics deviate from a deep, stable sleep profile. Imrath said nothing for most of that time. Thevris recalibrated the harness twice, convinced we had a fault. We did not have a fault. The protocol ended at 0510. I removed the harness manually. She stirred. She opened her eyes. She looked at the ceiling of the compliance chamber for a moment, and then she looked at me. Her expression was the expression of a person waking from a satisfying sleep in an unfamiliar place. Mild confusion, mild recognition, no distress. She asked for water. Thevris brought it. She drank half of it and set the cup on the armrest of the harness chair and said, with no particular significance, "I dreamed about the docks. Haven't thought about those in years." Then she asked again, about the food. I stood in the compliance chamber for some time after my team had filed out. The protocol harness was still in its deployed position. The monitors were still running. The biometric trace from the last 90 minutes was still on the display. That long, flat, possible line of delta sleep running the full width of the screen. The obelisk protocol has been administered 812 times in this facility across my tenure. In 41 cataloged species, it has produced compliance or cascade without exception. In humans, across the 3 prior records we could access from other facilities, it had never been tested at full saturation. Those records, I now understand, were from runs that were terminated early. The operators had stopped the sequence before completing it, reasons their own reports do not clearly explain. I suspect, reviewing those reports now, that the early termination was not a procedural choice. I suspect the operators simply could not determine what they were looking at and made the most conservative decision available to them. I understand that instinct entirely. I am filing this report because the authority asked me to document all anomalous compliance outcomes, and this outcome is, by any measure I can apply, anomalous. I am also filing it because I believe the relevant finding needs to be stated plainly, without interpretation, so that whatever body reviews this record in the future understands exactly what occurred here. The obelisk protocol, at full saturation, is a total bandwidth neural flood that has ended the coherent consciousness of every species we have tested it on, at or before the 90-minute mark. Karis Vaughn, human Category 4 intake. No augmentation, no prior resistance training, no documented neurological abnormality, completed the full protocol sequence and woke of her own accord and asked for something to eat. My recommendation, which I am entering into the official record of this facility, is that the protocol not be administered to human subjects again, not because of the humanitarian concern, though I note that for the record as well, because we do not currently understand what it does to them instead. And until we do, I would rather not find out what happens when one of them decides they have had enough rest.